NFL training camp, EU tariffs, and Columbia University. There are negotiation lessons for us in all three of these, and we're doing it this week. Today, we are going to continue our new segment, which is looking at current events through a negotiation angle. Hey all, I'm Bob Bordone. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School and founder of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute and author of Conflict Resilience, my all-new USA Today best-selling book. And today we are taking all negotiation lessons from the news of the week.
President Donald Trump announcing just moments ago that the United States and the European Union reached a framework for a trade deal after his talks with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen at his Turnberry Golf Club in Scotland.
I think it's great that we made a deal today instead of playing games. I'm going to let you say, but I think it's the biggest deal ever made. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
So this past week, President Trump, when he was in Europe, announced the biggest trade deal so far in his effort to renegotiate global trade. And this was the trade deal with the EU. There's all sorts of questions around, is this good for the US? Is this good for Europe? And the answer from a negotiation perspective is pretty darn complicated. So first, in terms of the short term, the terms of the deal, there is no doubt that this is an absolute win for the United States. Europe went into this hoping to see tariffs reduced to almost nothing, like single digits. They were at least hoping they'd be reduced to 10%, and they ended up with 15% tariffs. In fact, after the deal was announced, the French Prime Minister actually criticized the deal. He basically said the European Commission completely caved in to the Americans. So short term, this is a win for the United States, less so for Europe. Long term, there could be some really serious consequences here. Substantively, I think it continues to probably be a win for the United States. However, when we talk about negotiation, we talk not just about the substantive end, but also what impact does it have on the ability of the parties to work with each other going forward. That is always important in a negotiation. It's particularly important when it's your main allies in the world. And I would say that there are some serious costs and risks here for the United States. I think the lesson that Europeans will take away from this is that the US is prepared to use its leverage and think in short-term ways instead of in the longer term in terms of building a relationship, where in negotiation we might say when you have trust, you're able to expand the size of the negotiation pie, and when you don't have trust, you use your leverage to get a bigger piece of what might be a smaller pie. And so I think the risk here is that Europeans will say, you know, the United States is doing this in a very transactional way. They are not the people we want to choose long term as our partners. And we want to set this up that the next time we're in a negotiation, our BATNA is better. As a reminder, friends, for those of you who have been subscribing to my channel, you know what BATNA is. If you are new to this channel, first of all, subscribe right now. BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, it's the thing you do if you don't reach an agreement. And when parties negotiate based on their BATNA, the party with the better BATNA tends to win. And in this moment, the United States definitely has a leverage. But when somebody uses their leverage, the lesson that the other side has is instead of trying to think about mutual interests, how can we help each other? How can we be creative with each other? They spend all of the time between negotiation 1 and negotiation 2 trying to increase their leverage so that they have a better BATNA. In practical terms, for the United States and Europe, it means Europe looking to other trading partners that might not have been preferred till this moment. India, China, other parts of the developing world.
Look at what you did!
And so what I would say here is Early win for the United States, looking at long-term interests, maybe less so. The implication for all of you, really good negotiators, try to focus on short-term interests and long-term interests. They think about relationship. They think about what is the sustainability of this agreement when we have disagreements later on. Will the other side work with us, or will they use that disagreement to kind of slam us back? So, mixed bag on this one.
Michelle, as it turns out, Terry McLaurin did not show up to the Commanders training facility for the start of training camp with the other veterans. The Commanders took a conditioning test. Terry McLaurin was not there for the start of it. He's been seeking a new contract that he does not yet have.
So we are in the moment of NFL training camps, and football fans are super excited about this. And we're seeing this annual dynamic where some star players are suddenly not showing up for training camp.
Mike, where are you? You in there?
Sometimes very notoriously just choosing not to come. Sometimes maybe claiming that they have a family obligation. And part of what they're doing is a very particular negotiation behavior. They are acting in a way as holdouts, and they're taking advantage of two things that can often happen in negotiation. One, a deadline. Now, presumably, there is a whole bunch of time from the end of last season to the start of training camp when negotiations could be closed. But now training camp has started, and some deals aren't totally closed. The strategic use of a deadline to force the hand of the other side, I think, is what we're happening right now. And what we see happening is a game of chicken in some way, because the teams also have some leverage here. First of all, if someone doesn't show up for training camp, they don't get paid that day.
Really?
Really?
In some instances, there are also penalties for not showing up. So what you have right now is each side in a bit of a standoff and trying to impose costs on each other in the hope that one side will break. Now, to be clear, right, there are externalities in this negotiation, as in all negotiations. One is just the morale on the team. If you're a rank and file player, I mean, nobody in the NFL is rank and file, but because they're in the NFL. But like, if you're not a star and you're showing up, you might feel a little bit resentful to the star who suddenly thinks that he's so great.
What does he think he is?
He thinks he's Jay Kavanaugh. Is he wrong?
That resentment can hurt team morale and ultimately team performance. This is not an individual sport. Secondly, there's impact on fans. And I think part of the negotiation, frankly, is about fans. To what extent do fans get upset with the team saying, close this deal, we need this guy? Or do they say, you know what, this guy's a prima donna, like, don't give that extra money? And so part of what we see here, I think, is a test of leverage where there's a third party that's not at the negotiation table, but both sides are kind of sussing out how much influence that third party can have, that is fans. There's also these other externalities like merchandisers. Is this guy really going to be on the team or not? So what are some negotiation lessons for you? First of all, right, deadlines are really powerful in negotiation, and they could be used to your advantage. Example, right, school bus drivers typically do not go on strike in May. They go on strike at the end of August, right when the school year is starting. But also to be aware that there are risks to this strategy. It could hurt relationships. In a game of chicken, somebody may lose, and it could be you. And it could just have a bad overall taste on all sides. So it'll be interesting to see how this turns out of the various teams that have holdouts. Probably by next week, we'll have some answers on that.
Columbia University says it will pay more than $220 million in a settlement with the Trump administration. This is to resolve claims it discriminated against Jewish students.
Yeah, so let's turn from international tariff negotiations, from NFL negotiations to higher ed. Because this week there were two really big negotiation stories in higher ed. First, Columbia University, which has been under assault from the Trump administration, allegedly on grounds that it has not adequately protected Jewish students and has not fought anti-Semitism, although most likely on a whole bunch of other issues that the administration has concerns with, ranging from their DEI programs to the way they have college admissions and choose their scholars. The administration had been withholding or threatening to withhold, but in fact was withholding millions and millions of dollars from Columbia University, dollars that are used for all sorts of research and programs. And this week, Columbia University settles with a bunch of different terms, but paying a $200 million penalty to the administration. And people in the higher ed world have extremely strong views on this. On the one hand, what they say is, absent this, so much important work would stop getting done. On the other hand, from a negotiation perspective, the argument is, when you give in to a bully, when you give in to somebody who pounds the table, the lesson they learn is, do it again. In another part of the higher ed world, of course, is Harvard University. Harvard University, unlike Columbia, has traditionally, over the past months, been taking a much more oppositional stance. This week, though, it was announced, well, it wasn't announced, actually, there was a New York Times article, so this might be more like a leak, that suggested that Harvard University might be willing to pay $500 million to the Trump administration to settle. And so there's this question from a negotiation perspective that is a really tough one, which is, when do you negotiate and when do you say, sorry, we're not having it? And reasonable people obviously can agree or disagree on this really hard issue. I think what I would say from a negotiation perspective is, first, you have to understand the difference between tradable interests that matter to you and something that feels core to your mission or, in your life, core values. Anyone who's a parent here, would you be prepared to trade your child away for, I don't know, the riches of the universe?
Are you insane, or do you take something?
I suspect people would be like, no. Like, my values as a parent are such that I do not trade my child away. Would you maybe be willing to trade other things that are important to you to retain or to get something? Yeah, maybe. So there's a question of kind of core values here, and I think at issue for Harvard and Columbia are, what does academic freedom mean? How does that stand in balance with things like funding? The second issue, though, here goes to something I referenced earlier, which is, do I want to reward behavior that, from the perspective of many, and certainly as a negotiation analyst, I would agree, is experienced as and probably is in fact bullying behavior? And I think that is really tough here, because very few people, at least within the ambit of higher ed, actually think that the main issue that's being negotiated here is Harvard's efforts at handling or curbing anti-Semitism. Many people see this as an effort from the government to actually silence dissenting voices, take control of academic agendas, and basically put fear in scholars, academics, and others who might want to disagree with government policy. And to the degree that's true, it seems like those are values that very much a university, and perhaps the biggest and richest and most well-known university in the world, might want to say is beyond negotiation, and we don't want to give in to the bully on this one. So I think the lessons for all of us as individual negotiators are, know what your core values are and distinguish that from interests that might be important but tradable, and then really think about what are the repercussions of rewarding the bad behavior of somebody who is a bully, somebody who would push you around. And also think about what other choices do you have that might allow you to protect those core values and also resist the bully. So each of these scenarios raises hard questions about short-term versus long-term costs. What do you think about how do you take on a short-term yes that might have a long-term downside for you? I'd love to hear your comments in the comment section below. And before you go, please be sure, subscribe to this channel, like this video. If you haven't already picked up my book, Conflict Resilience, the link to buy it is in the description. Be sure to do that now, and we'll see you next time. Want to be a better negotiator? Watch this next video.